also are very, they haven't been exposed to the same kinds of things that older generations, that our generations had, where, you know, running around outside and hurting yourself was a normal thing. And it was necessary in order to understand limitations and then I'm sure it ties into this communication and language also, but they're just not doing that anymore. And like my son, he's on the computer all the time, and now even more because of school going online. It seems to be their territory and their realm, but it's the anxiety and the neuroses and the emotional problems that come with it seem to be something that they're really going to have to figure out. I mean, I don't know. It's their empire in a way.
That's fascinating.
An open experiment, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're not really sure how, you know, the psychological impact of all of this paradigm shifting is going to be.
This technology also opens up the possibilities for different kinds of, you know, areas of interest, you know, the diversification of interests. So on Zoom now we can have these kind of discussions, you know, philosophical discussions, right, with people across the globe, and maybe you will, you know, expand the kinds of language games that people can play, and that you know, that go beyond this kind of leveling effect that you're talking about. You know.
So it says, all that is of the soul, of the spirit, of mysteries of pregnant nature, of the spun enigmas of fate, or the arteries of coursing character in us by accident, by no accident, has no voice today. I mean, I don't know about you, but I think that that is very impactful, the way it says that. You know, just the fact that we don't really talk about any of this stuff that previous cultures took as routine to talk about, things like the soul, the spirit, the mysteries of reality and poetry and that kind of thing. That's not exactly our day-to-day conversational topics, is it? And I think he's partially blaming the language we use, partially blaming, well, yeah, the ideologies we have, but the language and ideology in this case seems to be merged. You know, if you do want to talk about these issues, yeah, good luck. You're not going to get very far. You know, a lot of people, you know, depending on who you're talking to, but a lot of people, you know, immediately starts asking, well, what is the reaction that you get when you start talking about things like soul or spirit or poetry? You know, I'll tell you, especially Americans, is they start saying, what good is this? How can I benefit from this? What's the benefit from, you know, how do I gain? How do I profit from this? What good is this going to do me? That's the immediate, especially Americans, that's especially the immediate reaction to it. What good is talking about any of this flighty, airy stuff? Where previous cultures would have understood that talking about that stuff is the reason for living, is the meaning for existence, but not to Americans, which if you've been reading, well, Smith particularly, you know how what we've been saying about that this whole time. And it is interesting that that kind of language imposition sort of keeps us in that box, keeps us from, you know, prevents us from any other viewpoint other than, you know, the immediate utilitarianist viewpoint of something that has to be immediately useful in order for it to be meaningful or worth anything.
I can take 5 minutes off.
Well, it's a vast change in the nature of being. I translate Heidegger's being as presence.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just picture it, it's like the classroom when they say, is somebody present? it's their actual presence is different from just the idea of them. And to me, at a very simple level, that's my understanding of Heidegger's point. There is something in actual existence, something in actual presence beyond mere ideas of it.
Oh, wow. How about this one? There's an incorrigible folly in the idea that a book, any book, can cure malformed insight and judgment. Even less is it possible for a book to do any good for someone with no inkling how to wrestle with his inner appetites and work toward moral reform, the art of constraint and sublimation. A reader, a mere reader, has a merely intellectual relation to what he reads, like a textbook or a newspaper. He has no concept of trying to burn or torture something out of himself, trying to uproot an addiction or prune excesses, to control the quality of weave the soul makes. Jews study Torah, but Christians read the Bible. Why does no one see the implicit difference? Jews are listening, searching between the words for clues, how they can reorient their souls and become assimilated into a higher wisdom. But Christians are trying to digest words and stories literalistically, trying to absorb them into an ego that already takes itself as perfect. You hear that egotism in their pride and proprietarianism masquerading as humility and salvation. God only
Okay.
cares about America.
Right.
The rest are fated to be damned. Blake said that the Jews assumed a right exclusively to the benefits of God will be a lasting witness against them, and the same will it be against Christians. What in us is weaving? Yeah.
Okay, the arrogance of the Christian compared to the Jew, right. Frightening concept. Didn't think of it that way, that horrific confidence of Western civilization creeping in. And the worst example of that, they say, are Americans. So they're the most damned of all.
Well, first of all, the idea that reading a text is, or should be, is supposed to be a collaboration, that you're collaborating with the text. It's, you know, I think William Burroughs talked about a third mind. There's the mind of the author and then your mind. And then as you read, there's a third mind that's created between the two. That, you know, you're not just picking up raw data off of Wikipedia, times and dates. The idea that you're supposed to bring something to the party, the idea that you're supposed to bring your background, your experience, your preconceptions, and create something new that didn't exist before. That's not really the way we're taught to read in school, I don't think. The idea that, you know, you're going to question what you read and poke at it and consider and create along with it, alongside it. And maybe you'll come up with something that was the opposite of what was intended. But what's wrong with that? I think this probably would get a little bit into our educational system where you know, we are, you know, the way it's structured is to create workers, is to create non-questioning rule followers.
Robots?
Yeah. And
non-questioning robots. Okay,
we're not
right.
taught,
yeah, that sounds a bit.
We're not taught to think creatively and think imaginatively.
Or
Um,
critic, or critically.
But
or
even
critically.
the Jews were pretty dogmatic, right? Even the Jews are pretty dogmatic.
Some were.
When they excommunicated Spinoza, right? Because they found him his book of ethics as a threat, to their morality. They just totally rejected Spinoza's idea because it was just, so new and
Possibly frightening. Possibly
frightening.
frightening.
Oh, sure,
And,
yes.
and I sort of wonder if we're talking about souls, and if we look at somebody, or if we think about somebody, or if we think about Thomas Merton and Thich Nhat Hanh and some of the great Talmud scholars, there is an absolute connection there, because I think in these tremendous thinkers, there's great critical thought. It isn't that sort of knee-jerk reaction, which when we were talking about a bit earlier about the computer, the little boy on the computer, a completely different way of thinking is emerging, and along with the neurosis that possibly the knee-jerk reactions of modern life bring. So I wonder too if critical thought or critical thinking is perhaps really almost something of the past. Not I'm thinking about, for example, the American political scene at the moment, where it's knee-jerk insult, 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 and nothing gets resolved. I wonder. Because there are, it's difficult in the reading, about Christians and Jews. I'm sure that, and I like the fact that the difference between studying the Talmud and reading the Bible, there is a huge difference in that. I don't honestly spend too much time with either personally, or the Quran. So I'm not, I'm not really very, not really qualified to make any comment about about those things. But there is a huge difference between reading and studying, and there's a huge difference between feeling what we read, and thinking about what we read. I sense.
Well, I think if I can find. I think one of the things I would point out is the idea that, Christ spoke in parables for a reason. The idea that, modern American Christians, take the parables literally, like, not completely misunderstanding that there's a message in there. And, I was in Catholic school until 5th grade. So, they don't teach that there's actual, a meaning behind this, that, that you take it literally, that the whole loaves and fishes thing actually happened. Christ walking on water was a real story. And, that the idea that there's actually supposed to be a deeper meaning to it, that just never gets taught. And it's like, if you tell that to most people, they'd look at you blankly. It just wouldn't. One of the reasons why Christ spoke in parables was precisely to keep out people who should not be associating with this material, to keep out the people who don't understand, who won't understand, who can't understand, who characterologically aren't fit to understand. I mean, if you're going to take a literalistic reading of this stuff, like, for example, like the story of Noah's Ark, like actually really happened, yeah, then quite honestly, you're just too dense to even be worth bothering with. Which is now, I think, what we're dealing with 99%. I mean, the idea of exoteric teachings and esoteric teachings, didache and kerygma, is gone completely. We just teach the surface level of the religion, and the idea that you're supposed to have a deeper meaning to it that actually means something. Yeah, I find very, 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 very few Christians are going to go in that direction, probably because they consider it heretical, and a lot of it is actually, quite frankly.
It seems like, we talk about the Old Testament and how their inherent search for meaning is just built into their consciousness, and I wonder how much of that is based on the fact that they had a tyrannical God who they had to reconcile. They had to deal with the fact that there was, death and pain and suffering, and there was really no other way of mediating that suffering other than finding a relationship with the higher power. And something that the New Testament and Christianity has done is it's kind of brought Jesus into the fray so that he becomes this sort of literal sort of example that we just have to mimic in a sense and take very literally for what he's done, so that we can sacrifice in the same way and acquire our virtue and wisdom and knowledge and everything that comes with that, which seems to remove something. I'm not sure what it is, but it seems to remove something essential. And I think this is related to perhaps I've just been reading some Nietzsche lately and trying to understand what his criticisms were, and I think it's tied somehow to that idea that Christianity and Jesus's sort of presence changes. It seems to do two things, and I don't think I could actually articulate it, but I'm just trying to think through or talk through the thoughts that I've had about perhaps why we have such a hard time. Like we said at the beginning of this, why don't people want to talk about these things? And I think Christianity has had this kind of hold on us and on our culture and on our consciousness for such a long time now that it's something about if you just sacrifice enough, you'll be virtuous. And there's something like that. And therefore, that's what it was. And therefore, no matter what we sacrifice, it's never enough. And on top of it, we're going to resent having to do it. And there's a difference there. And I don't know if I'm sorry to kind of give it some weeds there, but
I would agree with you that Christianity has a hold on our consciousness and what we're capable of thinking, what's possible for us to thinking. But I would say the same about capitalism.
Yeah.
I would say the same about science. All of these things are ideologies. I would say the same about any ideology is a prison, is a conceptual trap. Any ideology, and we all have ideologies, but any one that you put on you're going to be locked into that box, whatever it is.
Okay, you're talking about various types of context. If you build a Christian world, a Christian culture, you've created a certain type of context, and the minds that travel within inside that context only need a certain type of information.
Yeah, I think a lot of ideologies that are, they are built on the idea of a transcendent, truth and transcendent being that you need to believe in, and that you have to sacrifice your, what you have in this world, in the immanent world. And that's one of the struggles in philosophy is, which one is more correct? Should we believe in a transcendent, or should we believe in an immanent reality? And I think there's even a struggle, in modern philosophy with that, which one is more ethical, right? Because if you believe in a transcendent, and you may have like the highest moral principles, but if it's transcendent, how can you achieve, morality, right? That purpose, that higher purpose, and because you have to deny what's practical in this world, right? And so the argument is, if you, from some of the philosophers that say, well, the truth is in the eminent world, and you can have a moral purpose, a reason, and also a pragmatic, effect in this world, in this world. If you believe that this is the truth in the real world, in the natural world, and that's what Spinoza, ethics, actually really points out, and that was a threat to the Orthodox Jewish community, that there is only one world, which is this world, and if you believe in God, God is nature, God is in this world, right? And there is no other, and that's consistent with a lot of the ancient philosophies from the East, that also have worked this out.
Found the one that I was looking for here. I believe Christ expressed this new wisdom in homely but subversive parables, not just so that simple peasants might comprehend, but also for the sake of being esoteric by design. Unto them that are without, all these things are done in parables, that seeing they may see and not perceive, and hearing they may hear and not understand, lest at any time they should be converted, and their sins should be forgiven them. Mark 4:11-12. These teachings were not for all, but meant to be an impediment to those who should rightly be baffled and denied, those whose minds belonged still and forever to the old order. Yeah, you don't get that very much. The other one I had here on this one here. What shall it prosper a man if he gain the whole world but lose his own soul? Mark chapter 8, 36. Yeah, what do we gain by such egocentrism that is even half as precious as what we lose? What the world considers wise is foolishness to God. If the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. The idea that something of higher and more profound, more depth, more insight necessarily should be limited to some people and excluding some other people. Yeah.
Well, that's the evolution of the Bible, though. If you read Genesis, great amounts of humanity appear, which displease God, and he saves a very few from destruction.
The idea that, if it's a good thing, that it should be for everybody, which is, what we tend to think. There's a group, I think I mentioned this before, there's a group, meetup group that's called, the title of it, the name of it is called Philosophy for the 99%. I think I joined that one. I think they're in Washington, D.C. I don't know if I ever will go to one of their meetings, if they ever have an online one or not. I haven't checked, but I would want to see if I might ever have a conversation with that organizer and ask him why he titled his group that. Philosophy for the 99%. Because my way of thinking is that's precisely what you don't want. You don't want philosophy for the masses. Philosophy should not be for the masses. They're just going to fuck it up. Nietzsche's quote, philosophy is only for the healthy. The sick, it just makes sicker. Philosophy necessarily has to be an elitist sport. It has to be for an elite chosen few. I think that it seems perfectly obvious to me, because if you did give, if you know, for one thing, it's like the idea, yeah, pearls before swine, you know, teaching a pig to sing, you're wasting your time and annoying the pig. And the tools that you're giving them, they're just going to mess everything up. They don't have the capacity, they don't have the character, they don't have the background, the knowledge, the education to use any of these. But you know, we're such egalitarians in America. We're such equalitarians in America. We believe everything should be for everybody. Well, you can invite people in, but you know, some people just aren't going to. You know, all men are not created equal. That's absurd on the face of it. All men are not created equal, for goodness sake.
Well, it's a contradiction in terms, because it's assuming that the 99% are even interested in philosophy, right?
Well, of course, but
so
you know,
first of all, they don't exhibit any interest, right? And second of all, because of their lack of interest, they don't have any capacity.
well, you know, the idea that, yeah, well, as Schopenhauer said, man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. You know?
But isn't an aphorism exactly that though? Is trying to make philosophy digestible? I mean, it's introducing ideas, right, but in a sort of a container.
Well, that's true.
That makes it sort of, so it's not like you're either in philosophy or out. It's like, to what degree is philosophy useful to you, perhaps?
That's true. I don't think it makes a difference. I mean, Nietzsche wrote aphorisms. I mean, most people just aren't going to, I don't think it makes a difference. I mean, most people aren't going to be interested in it anyway, no matter what. So the point I'm making is, you know, this stuff is not fit for everybody. And the idea that you have to dumb it down to water it down to the point where people can understand it is doing a severe damage to the material.
On the other hand, Shakespeare did write for the masses, didn't he? Did you hear me?
I heard you.
Okay. But I wonder how much. Huh? I'm sorry.
I think the Globe Theater did have the floor where the masses would all gather, and you know, the cheap seats. Yeah. And then the upper classes would be around the balconies. Mm-hmm. And so there's plenty of japery and, you know, slapstick in Shakespeare. One criticism that's been made of what was done with making Shakespeare into a god is that they actually changed the way the material was presented. It was, the Globe was theater in the round. People would be wandering in and out of the set all the time. And then later, I think in the 18th century, they you know, where Shakespeare was deified, they had the big curtain. Each scene would have this big dramatic ending and then opening onto the new scene. And there's almost religiosity about it, how, you know, hanging on to every word. And you see sometimes, even today, you see presentations of Shakespeare where it really doesn't seem like the actors understand what they're saying. And maybe in some cases, no one really knows, because, I mean, idiomatic expressions, you know, they lose context. And I mean, it's kind of like trying to explain the Robin Williams routine on the Tonight Show to people 400 years from now who have no idea what, he's referencing commercials and what was in the news last week. I mean, there's no way they can possibly understand it, right?
Well, you have to read one of those editions that has the explanation and the.
No, but sometimes they don't know. I'm saying that they're
The
guessing at best. They're guessing at best. I'm trying to think of an example. If I talk, if I say, all Cheeto heads unite, and 400 years from now, saying, well, Cheeto, what was a Cheeto? Oh, someone who cheats. Wait, maybe a cheetah, the animal that runs in the jungle. They have no, they don't know that Cheeto was a cheese. So they were just snapped, and there was a politician. I mean, it's not possible.
I think we're done with that. Let's see. The idea that the next one, ratified with the left hand. All accusations give implicit permission. I expected such a thing of you. I think there could be a number of ways of approaching that one. Anybody? All accusations give implicit permission. I expected such a thing of you.
It sounds a bit old world to me. It sounds like the sort of thought or banter which belongs in a more a prior time. It's
the way I take it is, if you're angry at somebody, what is it you're angry about? If you're angry at something somebody has done, what are you angry about? You ever analyzed that?
Right. People sometimes transfer their anger. They're frustrated about, they've had a hard day at the office, and they come home and yell at their wife. This food is terrible. You burnt it, or when there's nothing wrong with it. They just have tension inside of them. They're releasing.
Well, there's that.
Well, it can be a question of prominence, like if you're having an argument about ideas or values. There's a form of self-promotion there, that your view is the correct one and the other view isn't correct, and it's a certain hierarchical element there. One of course, the primal stories of is Cain and Abel, of course, that Cain is angry with Abel because of his better relationship with the father. So there's an element of envy or jealousy there. So if I'm arguing with somebody about views, you can feel your emotions peak up, and it's about your position. It's about your prominence in relationship to the other person. Like, who is this metaphysical gods? You're not explicitly thinking about a god, but it's as though there's a divine father. It's a question of position, of eminence. Or when people get into I'm right, you're wrong, it's
I think where I would go would be the idea that if you're truly angry at somebody who has done you wrong in some way, I think I've heard a lot of people write on this subject that if you're angry, who are you really angry at? And when you really analyze it and start digging deep, you realize, if someone has cheated you or in some way, if someone has done you harm in some way, that ultimately you're angry at yourself for trusting someone you shouldn't have trusted, for not being able to see through somebody's lies. Ultimately, your anger is directed at yourself. That you weren't smart enough to see this person for who they really are. So ultimately, you're blasting yourself for not being perceptive enough.
Do you think, David, all of you, do you think anger is, if it's a secondary emotion, do you think that the theme of today's talk has been about loss of acuity, loss of, and I think perhaps anger too is the disappointment, the gut feeling of loss, whether it's loss of, we think somebody's not respecting us, we think we're being belittled, or anyway, loss of some sort of some sort. And I'm wondering what you think of that.
And then what is that emotion as a result of that loss? Disappointment.
Grief, a form of grief, disappointment.
Grief, you're getting there. Ultimately, we're going to get to the word fear.
Fear.
Yeah.
Fear.
It's ultimately, it's all about fear.
My constant companion. I know it well.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're angry that someone has cheated you, and if it's true that you're really angry that your understanding of humanity and your understanding of people and your understanding of your own gullibility is lacking, is not up to snuff, is not what it would be, then ultimately you're angry at yourself. But behind that the anger is the secondary emotion. The primary emotion is the fear. The fear of what? The fear that you are that gullible. The fear that you are someone who can be taken advantage of. And your fear of not trusting your own judgment. Your fear of not being able to trust your own perceptions. Your fear of not being able to make the right choice. And your lack of self-knowledge. And if that's truly what you're scared of, then yeah, you're going to get into these messes one after the other in your life.
Okay, it's a fear of a lack of potency in relation to a world which is looming large around you. You know, are you really strong enough to battle that world?
Yeah, I think fear is a great emotion that most of us live in. And that's actually a huge insight that most people never get to. Reductionism and emotions, cannot they stand on their own? Well, there's quite a lot of psychology written about primary emotions and secondary emotions, that a secondary emotion such as anger is a mask for a deeper emotion. Quite a lot of many decades and many thinkers in psychology who've written on this. No, a secondary emotion like anger is never just what it is. It's always, there's a deeper issue going on. At least that's the contemporary understanding of psychology as we've gotten to it now.
What is
possible? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please. Mine was just.
I was thinking about the kind of like the master slave relationship that Hegel explicates, that we are in this kind of relationship with the other, and it's in some ways it's very exploitive, but we expect that, that we allow ourselves to be exploited, and that's a kind of relationship that we usually often have with the other. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, evil humanity exploits the earth.
Right.
It's something I find peculiar when you come into a lot of discussions, and a lot of people are very of a sort of a socialist persuasion, and so they're hoping for a society which becomes more welfare orientated, and they think of the evil guys at the top. But I sort of come back to these people that feel themselves on the lower tier, us, the normal humanity. Aren't we exploiting the earth at some level to everywhere? We're all exploiters of something. So we're angry with the top 1% or whatever it is for being the biggest exploiter. But we too, down the bottom, we too exploit things. So I just find the position just a slightly hypocritical.
Yeah. Yeah. We accuse the other of exploiting us, but then we also say, yeah, that's we have also given permission to be exploited.
Well, if you're talking in the environment and ecology, yeah, well, I mean, it's amazing. Our entire civilization is based on exploiting the natural resources we have, and
Right.
we're starting to find there's either limitations of that, or it was a bad idea in the first place.
Right. And in that sense, we're exploiting ourselves, right? We're undermining our own survival, our own well-being.
That seems to be the dawning awareness that we're coming to.
Right. We just can't help ourselves.
Well, it's the nature of any organism to expand to the limits of its environment. So we're getting into, what was his name, Malthus here?
Yeah.
The Malthusian vision of humanity, that they would just simply expand to the limits. His argument was that at certain points in history, the productivity would rise greatly, but the mechanism of humanity reproducing itself is constant, whereas the potential rise of productivity is not constant. So eventually humanity will reach its limits and not be able to create a greater limit. I find the things like Extinction Rebellion, ultimately these revolutionaries that would prove hypocritical. I think the ambition behind all these movements is purely about power and who has the power, and it doesn't matter who gets into power. Whoever's going to be in power will just will exploit the earth to its limits. What upsets, say, Extinction Rebellion is a group other than themselves is exploiting the earth. So their ambition is to gain power, as in Animal Farm, and become exterminate the current exploiters and become the new exploiters at the top. This is human nature. It's to me, well, a horrible contemplation, isn't it? That just seems to be that, I've become more and more behaviouristic in my view of humanity over time. And to me, humanity, you got Shakespeare, writes all this wonderful stuff, but at the end of the day, human beings are just an advanced animal and acts like that.
The problem with all utopian schemes or altruistic desires is human nature. Well, the fault is not in our stars, but on ourselves. And in the East, they have, a more cyclical worldview that there's really no progress. That progress is this,
I'm not optimistic of any outbreak of enlightenment suddenly occurring.
The Enlightenment was a few centuries ago. There was an outbreak in history, but it's I think it's on the wane now, actually.
And it's also a matter, it's very subjective, what you consider quality. A person from 500 years ago, Shakespeare's time, 400 years ago, might think reason for war, to kill people, to win. What do you mean? What kind of namby-pamby world are you people living in 400 years from now that you need a reason to go to war? They might think that we've evolved into something more insect than human, that we're half alive for 80 years instead of being fully alive for 40 years. It's, you know, it's a matter of opinion. I mean, we could say, oh, well, okay, well, for every 2 steps forward, we're taking 1 step back, that we are making progress, we are becoming more humane and more civilized. But even warfare, I think Jared Diamond, the anthropologist, pointed out that in traditional warfare, he studied Papua New Guinea, you know, if you have 2 tribes of 100 and every 5 years they have a skirmish and 3 people on either side are killed, that doesn't sound like very much, right? That's 3% of the population every 5 years. If 3% of the population of the United States was killed every 5 years, that would be what, 9 million people every 5 years? So our wars are much less destructive and fatal than they used to be if we can assume that we are all descended from people in traditional societies like in Papua New Guinea. So you say, okay, so we're making progress. But once again, it's a subjective thing, it's a value judgment. So like I said before, someone else could say we're devolving into half alive people who kind of drift through life, and it's all very pleasant, but we're never intensely alive. We don't have the desire to kill and to take frothing bites out of each other. We're not really fully alive. It's a value judgment.
Well, that's Nietzsche's Germanic beast, isn't he? That's been shackled by Christianity. I don't know. Germanic beast's a bit worse than the other beasts. You know, how did the Latin beast go with the Roman Empire? Or if we go back to the ancient Middle East, the Assyrian beasts. Do we have a hierarchy, a scale of beastliness here? You know, did the ferocious Teuton win out after all, or does Nietzsche seemed to root himself in the ferocious Teutonus, didn't he? That for him was a wild beast of the forest that was tamed by Christianity.
He also said, against boredom, the gods themselves contend in vain.
When you've run out of motive, when you've run out of spiritual ideas, okay. I suppose the thing with Smith, though, is he's using the old trichotomy of man, that is body, soul and spirit. Yeah, the most thinking, I think even the church became pretty much body and soul. In fact, there was that became a convention in the Catholic Church due to a decision made at a conference in the year 869, in the middle of the Dark Ages. They decided that the spirit won't be referred to much as man. So the Catholic Church would refer to humans as body and soul rather than body, soul and spirit. And it's easy for us to think of body and soul. We can say body and minds, but what did the ancients mean by spirit above soul? Now, Smith is using that concept. So what is the difference between spirit and soul? It's always been a question for me. Now, like I said, literally, the Catholic Church banned the concept of spirit, of personal human spirit in the Dark Ages.
Yeah, that kind of dualism is kind of problematic for me. It's
Well, there's that word again, problematic.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and I think it can be worked out. You can talk about body and soul, and not as a dualism, but as a single idea of understanding oneself and the world. You know, you don't have to say there's a soul and then there's a world and you give up one for the other. I mean, they're both, you can think of them as a single entity in which we are a part of a unified.
Yeah, that's called monism.
Yeah, monism. Yeah, okay. Or it could be panpsychism. You know, but monism is a belief in one God, right?
Monism is a belief in one substance, rather than just saying that everything is body. Yeah, everything is material.
Okay. Oh yeah, everything is substances. You don't have to describe it as material.
So
but
there's no special category such as soul.
Right. You look at Spinoza. You know, talked about the God and substance and nature as being the same. It's just a different word to describe the same thing. And so there is no dualism there. You don't have to separate yourself from that substance. We are in nature. We are in the world, you know, not apart from it. We are not separate. Just because we think of ourselves as separate individuals, you know, but we're, you know, to think of ourselves as outside nature is just, seems very artificial, you know.
Yeah, I'm sort of struggling with that one. You mean he was pantheist?
Well, yeah, or panpsychist or whatever. But we come up with all kinds of things to explain what we think is true. But we come out of nature. We don't. We come from nature. We don't. You know. We don't. We're not separate from nature.
I would like to throw something in that maybe will just complicate the whole issue. There's this documentary called Particle Fever about the search for the Higgs boson, right? Which some people call the God particle, right? And what it came down to was that there was, within the physics community, the astrophysics community, there was a dichotomy between the school of supersymmetry and the school of multiverse. And so the Higgs boson was going to resolve this once and for all. And one of the physicists is saying, you know, if it's on the side of the multiverse, we might as well just quit, because there may be infinite number of universes, and some speed of light is half what it is in ours, and others double. I mean, we can't really assume anything, and even what we're seeing in our telescopes. So they were hoping. So I can't remember exactly what the numbers were. Something like, if the force of the Higgs boson was 115 giga electron volts, then that would be definite evidence of supersymmetry. And if it was 145, then it would be definite indication of multiverse. And so it came out, what was it, 15, so it was like 117 or something. It was just slightly, 120 would have been right in between, but they finally measured it, and it was like 117 giga electron volts. So that it was slightly in the favor of supersymmetry. So everybody was happy, you know, all the physicists are celebrating and popping champagne. Hey, we're still in business. We still have a job.
Supersymmetry.
I mean, that's how absurd. I mean, even at the level of science, you know, very precise. I mean, there's, you know, we're talking about, you know, people who are working with particle accelerators, $50 billion product, you know, smashing together protons. And, you know, this is considered very serious, the smartest minds in the world. And it comes down to this kind of duality of you know, on one hand, you could say polytheism, where every 10 miles is different ancestors, different idols, different gods, or pantheism. Well, yes, we have all kinds of different gods, but they're part of the same family. It's one branching tree of the universe, of universe. And you know, maybe it's just impossible. I mean,
supersymmetry means that there is one universe.
Yes.
And okay, as opposed to multiverse, right?
Yes, right. But I mean, what if this is part of our brain, that once upon a time there were every few miles different gods and goddesses, and they had nothing to do with each other. But then when some kind of central authority manifested itself, however, through force or just through practicality, then all of those different gods and goddesses were seen to be part of the same family as a practical consideration for trade, kind of like a medium of exchange. Let's have a unified system in order to defend ourselves. Let's say we're our peninsula, we're all different tribes in the peninsula, and we're being invaded from the north. Let's unite and see ourselves as cousins and all our gods and goddesses as part of a pantheon of branches of the same tree. Well, that serves a purpose. But I mean, what if we're incapable of thinking in ways other than what our brain has been programmed by evolution to be able to conceive of? And so it's the same repeating pattern.
I like that idea of a repeating pattern because it is the creative process that we're describing. It's that sort of it's alchemical in a sense, right? Things dissolve into just a soup, a hot molten soup of mercurial potential, right? From which everything is born, and it begins to separate and it begins to divide like mitosis or something, and take form. And there's division in that and distinction, and that's a form of consciousness. When things become, it reminded me when you were talking about the polytheistic gods. It's like, well, isn't that exactly what happened moving from a Greek and Roman system to a Christian system, let's say, where, it became a unified theory that made more sense to people. And that was a process, I think, and it doesn't stay there, but maybe that's what we're constantly experiencing and trying to locate ourselves within. It's like, where do we currently reside within this collective process of coming to of an evolution of our own consciousness that's begun from beginning of time, or human consciousness.
And maybe the Romans were already pantheistic, and the Christianization process consisted of a further unification and solidification. And I think in some cases, like in the 4th, 5th century, it was really blatant that you had temples with different statues of different gods, and they simply gave the gods new names. Mars is now Peter, and Zeus is now Paul or Christ. And they literally changed the names of the statues in some cases.
What was the purpose of that?
Well, they could have smashed them, just destroyed them. But
I mean,
they made a new pantheon of the apostles, and
right.
The Catholic Church is full of statues and, if not outright worship of statues, then lighting candles before them, praying to this patron saint of this, going on a journey, praying to Saint Christopher, getting married, praying to Saint Elizabeth. It's very similar to the Roman Catholic Church, is an offshoot of Rome.
Right.
So true.
Right. So even if there's a multiplicity of universes, and it's an infinite number of them, then it's still, even though we can't maybe contain or imagine, we can imagine it as one universe, right? That goes on.
Not if they don't intersect, not if they don't really intersect in any way. If we can't travel to them, we can I'm not even sure how we would be able to perceive them.
Exactly right. We couldn't imagine how we could intersect, but they are still in a continuum of space and time, though, right? Right. So if it's in a continuum of space and time, or some sense of that space and time continuum, then they are part of the one. Nietzsche describes the idea of the multiplicity of the identities, and then the changing identities, and the lack of identities in an eternal return, is a vision of what existence is. It's just an eternal return of these multiplicities. If you're interested in that kind of idea of eminence. There's a French philosopher named Deleuze that we have a discussion on Thursday evenings.
Is that the one about differences or something?
Yeah. We're reading his book called Difference and Repetition, which is also influenced by Nietzsche and Spinoza and Bergson, and which the reality is an eminence of repetition of differences and an eternal return of the same. Yeah, which is really interesting. And it opened your mind up to understanding of how Hegel and Kant and Plato fit into this, because it's really a kind of inversion of Plato's idea of the forms, but instead of being transcendent, they're eminent. The ideas are eminent rather than being transcendent.
I don't know if anybody here has read Castaneda's, but there's this very funny scene where Don Juan, his teacher, puts him into an altered state of consciousness. And in this altered state of consciousness, he sees this kind of silhouette of Christ and light, waves of light coming out of the silhouette. And he gets moved with emotion. He's tears in his eyes because he feels like he's seeing God, and not just God, the human potential, the glorious potential of human beings to strive and become more than we are, and to not give up. And he comes out of this altered state, and he tells Don Juan all about it. And as happens throughout the books, Don Juan starts, laughing hysterically. He thinks it's God, and he tells Carlos Castaneda, he tells him, "You saw the mold. You saw the mold of man. That it kind of sounds like a Platonic ideal or archetype, right? That every form, a tree, a mountain, everything has its almost like blueprint, right?" And so he tells him in his altered state, and Carlos Castaneda can't accept it because it was such a powerful, moving experience for him that he was sure there was a consciousness there, there was volition there, and so that's where that chapter ends.
Altered state, yeah.
Sometimes he gives him power plants in the beginning to knock him out of his, what he calls the tonal, the kind of day-to-day reality, and put him into the nagual. And nagual also means sorcerer. But later on, he reveals why ostensibly Carlos, I don't know, is it a novel? I mean, maybe as a novel, it's really incredibly creative. If he really just went down to Mexico and took notes, well, that's okay, but it's not as much work of creativity. But anyhow, ostensibly, he's a graduate student at UCLA in the anthropology department, in the doctoral program in anthropology. He's studying, Toltec religion. And so he wants to go down to see if he can find someone to tell him about it, especially about, he's heard that there was power plants were used in order to give people visions, almost like the oracles in Greece. And so he drives down there, and he goes into some canteen, and this guy just walks right up to him and wants to talk to him. And it turns out later, Don Juan explains to him why he wanted to talk to him. And so Don Juan explains that every living thing has a field, and human beings have a egg-shaped kind of energy field around them, and that 99.999% of human race has a simple two-segmented egg-shaped energy field around them, but that this tiny other percent point, or whatever 1%, has either 3 or 4. And so Don Juan is able to shift in and out of an altered state of consciousness by will, without drugs or anything. And he saw Carlos Castaneda, and it was like finding, a needle in a haystack. And so he was immediately interested. And throughout the books, he's telling, Carlos Castaneda that you're a sorcerer like me. And Carlos Castaneda is always denying, saying, no, I'm a Christian, I'm not a sorcerer. But what was the point of all that?
So he took the peyote?
Oh, no. So later on, in the early books, he's taking these power plants that Don Juan has given him to knock him out of his normal day-to-day reality. But later on, he doesn't have to do that. Later on, Don Juan is able to just lay hands on like a few feet from his body and manipulate his energy field into kind of reset. What does he call it? I can't remember what he calls it. Shoot. But anyhow, he can put him into an altered state of consciousness just by changing his energy field, touching his energy field and shifting it. He just said that's what it is, right? The assemblage point, right. That this egg-like energy field has there's a point of connection where it emanates from. It's sort of a center, which he calls the assemblage point. So that's what he does, right? He manipulates his assemblage point. It's somewhere like in back of your neck, I think, like maybe a foot or two away or something.
Wonder what he's doing now, Carlos.
How he passed away a number of years ago.
Did he pass away?
Yeah, quite a while ago, I think.
Yeah. He had a kind of a cult in Los Angeles of people going to his meetings, and he had an additional book he wrote after the stories of Don Juan. He had this, which was kind of like yoga, kind of like not yoga, more like Tai Chi, right? Of warrior stances, I think he called it, right? Of ways to cope with day-to-day reality, perceiving attacks and doing these body postures to fend off these.
I suppose there was an explosion of or what we call occult ideas into the media post World War II. It was very strong at one stage, and of course it followed on from sort of a public view of occult material. Had really started with things like the Theosophical Society in the late 19th century, but of course this sort of culminated in the sort of 60s, 70s period, didn't it? When things like Carlos Castaneda's was very, very influential. And you only tend to find him reminisced by older types now. The younger people probably don't know of him anymore. So, there was once, when I was a kid, back in the 70s, I was quite fascinated by anything mystical, and there's just a huge amount of stuff that was on the bookshelves at the time. You down there on TV, what Alan's Landsberg and In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy.
How about Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance? Remember that?
I remember the title. I've never read it.
It was very philosophical.
Very, very philosophical. Especially for, I think, young men. It was kind of an escape route. And especially
he's having a dialogue in between driving cross country on his motorcycle and stopping to fix it. He's having these reveries, right, with this this imaginary Greek character. What was the character's name? Oh shoot, I can't remember the name.
I can't remember either, but it was almost like a father figure.
Right.
Yeah, so he was trying to come to terms with the male relationship.
Right. No, but I remember there was among the other things they talked about, there was an ongoing discussion where this Greek character is asking him over and over again, yes, but is there such thing as quality? And it's I don't think he ever.
Or equality.
No, not equality. No, actually quality.
Quality.
Are some things better than other things? Do some things have inherent something called quality? And of course, most people would say, obviously, yeah, of course, that's ridiculous. That's a absurd question.
Well,
but what if there isn't? I guess that's the real thing that I didn't really think about the possibility that there isn't until the end of the book. What if there isn't? What if we can only receive what we can receive? We can only, if your frame of reference is to only understand things in your own kind of iconography of language of iconography and symbolism, and you're not really capable of understanding, especially as you get older, new ideas that are just too different, then maybe we can only, we can only receive what's presented to us in a certain way that we've been brought up to look up to and admire. We can, told this is great music. Listen to it. Pay attention. Think about what makes this music better than other music, instead of just listening and, if your mind wanders, well, I don't like it, it's not good. Or if you are finding sections of it, if you love those mass strings, oh yeah, give me more of that.
Right. There's no standard. There's no standard of judging what is good art or bad art.
Right.
It's all cultural indoctrination and influence. So whatever you are exposed to, allowed to expose to, that's what you think is art or the quality or whatever.
Phaedrus.
I would really
the character's
disagree.
name was Phaedrus.
Yeah, Phaedrus.
Phaedrus.
You're
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But I would disagree with in terms of what your idea of culture is, of good culture is based on what you're exposed to when you're young. I think it's not like language that certain neurons just shut off if they're not used. So, in Hindi, there are 46 sounds, and in English, there are only 26. So adults cannot pronounce those ones that are they have not heard.
I can't learn Hindi? I'm too old, I can't learn Hindi?
No, you can't. It's strange. You won't be able to pronounce those particular words because those neurons only are developing when you're young. So if you never hear those sounds, you can't. That's why so many people have such a hard time saying my name. It's not Jyoti, it's Jyoti. And it's that t that's not there in English. So, but I think art grows with you, and the quality grows with you. It's not like it's not a validation or a judgment thing.
It's sort of like asking, is there such thing as beauty? And I think most people would say yes, right? Of course.
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Well, then the shot, right?
Exactly
It's a lovely statement.
Right.
Now that is a quality statement.
Yeah.
Well, but
that's a denial of a quality, isn't it?
Well, beauty is only one aspect of art also. If you think of art not necessarily as a static form, right?
Mm-hmm.
Think of art as also a verb or a process by which there is some pretty ugly stuff that takes place on the way towards the ideal or beauty. And it encapsulates both the chaos and the order. And good art, which we do kind of come to agreements by holding on to things that seem to still contain something of a truth, we'll say, or something that, throughout generations and years and years and years continues to tell us something about what we agree that art is. And maybe that's its inherent ability to contain that tension, give it form. And we can talk about that both as an ideal, but also as something that's constantly dynamic and in flux and flow and moving. So I think when we have a hard time talking about art because it's like talking about God. It's like, well, what do you mean? Well, what's your idea? Where are you coming from? This comes back to the first part of our conversation today was like, why do I feel such anxiety about and walking on eggshells about speaking, trying to get at a truth or trying to articulate myself with others? It's because we're all coming from such a different place, and it's almost like having to go down to something deeper to really get at what someone's trying to say. because our definitions are kind of a little.
I've got a
I
great
think-
one for that.
Oh. May I
Or do you
say
want to
just
say?
may I just
Go
say
ahead. Yeah,
one
go
short thing about what Darren said? One thing is like art resonates within us. Hey, I'm in a meetup, honey. Resonates, and that resonation, one doesn't know where it comes from, you know, that it comes from. And also art, you know, it's, hey, I like my hat.
Where's the lint rollers?
I like your hat too.
It's Austin, you know, 115 degrees sun. I need it.
Wow.
That's perfect.
I think there's what's really one word that art brings to me is resonation, is, you know, how much, and that I would hate to say that that is cultural. I would say it's more experiential, you know, what you have experienced. And also it's really difficult. It's to me, let me just hold on one second. Asking the question why, to me, doesn't get us anywhere. But asking the question how is this particular art recognized and how is art created seems, because it's a process, and it's, the process is always a how, not a why. I mean, anyhow, I'll be quiet now and attend to my daughter's needs.
Does anybody see the
I'll
movie?
bring in Douglas Adams here when he was talking about the phases of civilization in his book Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that the three phases, we start off in the primitive cycle is how do we eat? And the level of culture is when we ask, why do we eat? And the level of decadence is when we say, where do we go for lunch? So there we have the how. The how is the primitive, whereas the why is the more advanced philosophical phase of culture.
Got to give it up for Douglas Adams. Yeah.
Did anybody see the movie The Square? I think it was last year or maybe the year before. Elizabeth Moss from Mad Men was in it. I guess it was a Swedish movie, it had subtitles. But the gist of it is this guy, he's the director of a art museum, and they put a neon light embedded in the pavement to make a square, and so it glows, and especially at night, and it's just there. And it's all the talk of Stockholm and people going, and the idea is to see what people do with this. And will just a simple definition of an area be sufficient to get people to step inside? Do they act different when they step inside? Will they gather there? Will they go from being, just to see what happens, right? So anyhow, Elizabeth Moss is this reporter who's going to interview the director of the art museum, and she says to him, how can you call that art? It's just, it doesn't really, there's no talent, there's no eye-hand coordination, and it's just, you know, an idea. And then he tries to justify it. And then she says to him, well, you know, there are some pedestals in his room where they have, you know, pieces of art on the pedestals. And she says to him, so if I take my handbag here and stick it on that pedestal and you put it in the middle of the art gallery, does that make it art? And he basically says, yes, it's calling attention. There's artistry in it, in the creation of it. Or even if it was just a rock, it's making people stop in the middle of what they're doing and saying, I think, the presenter is saying, I think this is interesting. Look at this. What do you see? It could be, you know, so.
Yeah,
Well, that's a bit of a question. What art is, as I said, in the tertiary subjects are distinguished into arts and sciences?
I think most people, when they think about it, they want to see a certain amount of craft and experience and training and talent. And so, although I suppose you could say there's a certain amount of talent in recognizing something that's beautiful or interesting and presenting it.
I mean, Duchamp kind of blew it wide open when he put a urinal on a pedestal, and he demonstrated that art was also just an idea, and that your ability to communicate and articulate your ideas, I mean, that's what he was really good at. He was really good at convincing people that this was art. And of course, most people were their feathers were very ruffled by that idea, but he was able to back it up. And so now, you know, it kind of, for the remainder of art history, is going to say, well, it depends on your intention and your ability to communicate your intention. And that's what we're going to call art, you know, and beauty is going to be a small part of it, you know. Ideas are going to be another part. Craft is going to be this other part. And yeah, no wonder we're a little confused when we talk about it.
I mean, there's this whole new creation of installation art that wasn't there, you know, 10 years ago. And
Duchamp started that too, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I have about 3 things backed up that I've been wanting to say. First, to John's point, there's another movie that I would recommend. I think it was called Incognito. Rod Steiger's in it. There was an interesting point there. It's about an artist, and he says, "Okay, I paint this painting." It's about the art industry. I paint this painting, I show it to you, and I tell you it was painted by Rembrandt and it's worth $10 million. And you tell me it's worth $10 million. And then I say, no, I'm kidding you. Actually, I painted it. Now it's worthless. It's the same painting. You know? All right, so that was one of the things I wanted to say. The other one, I'm going to give you this one. This one is to Darren. When we're talking about, I find all conversations about art problematic. Yeah, because it's about definitions. So here, I'm going to
use that word again.
So I'm going to give you this. First character says, "Can video games be art?" Other character says, "Let me ask you a different question. Can video games be zinky doink?" What's zinky doink? It's a term for a certain type of stuff with no agreed upon parameters, which can be used to describe literally anything given the proper context. Okay, I get it. Never mind. You're obtuse. But am I zinky doink? Yeah, and that's pretty much how I feel about conversations about art.
I think it's useful to move it away from a binary of whether it is or isn't, and into the spectrum of is it strong or is it weak? You know, is it doing a good job or is it not? And to me, that's where the conversations about art are, because, you know, we know enough now that you can justify anything to be. I mean, Mario Mertz shit in a can, and you know, and made an edition of them, you know, and this was conceptual art in the 60s that they exploited that, and so it was no accident that people who were the most apt at language and had backgrounds in art history wrote themselves into the marketplace and wrote themselves into history itself. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of the state where we're at with art. And I think you can only use what is your experience and what do you value and about art. And
yeah, I do have a presentation on this subject that actually does very much clarify what the intention of artists are, if you'll indulge me and give me the 5 minutes it'll take to go through it. I actually do have a presentation on this. All right. This comes from, in his book, Making Comics, Scott McCloud created a chart characterizing artists according to 4 intentions. What artists are most interested in creating art. We start with the formalist. The formalist is interested in examining the boundaries of the art form, stretching them, exploring what the form is capable of. The formalist is interested in experimenting, turning the form upside down and inside out, moving in new, bold, untried directions, inventing and innovating. Formalists are the cutting edge, the avant-garde, the ones willing to break tradition and establish ways. Strict narrative or craft is not as important as trying something new and unexpected, playing with and breaking traditional concepts, getting to the heart of understanding what art itself is. And then if you graph it on the chart, you know, individual, objective, artistry first, revolution based. Next, the classicist. The classicist is the artist who focuses on beauty, craftsmanship, and a tradition of excellence and mastery. The aesthetic experience of the art is what is important. Art is meant to move and affect an audience, deliver an emotional experience. Classicists strive to perfect their craft in order to produce the most effective work possible. Collective, objective, artistry first, tradition-based. Next, the animist. The animist is devoted to the content of art above all else. The animist's goal is telling the story, conveying the message as directly as possible. All the craft in art is in service to the delivery of the content. The goal of art is to effectively deliver its content with as little that distracts from that job as possible. Collective, subjective, representation first, tradition-based. Next, the iconoclast. The iconoclast is interested in portraying raw human experience in as honest and authentic a way as possible. Art is to hold a mirror to reality, to show the audience the hard, painful truths of existence. The iconoclast resists pandering, comforting indulgences, or diluting the art, considering that to be selling out. Artistic integrity is critically important to iconoclasts. Beauty, craft, and standard narrative may be cast aside in pursuit of the expression of the truth of human emotion. And here is the graph, and I have it. You start, you know, individual, collective, interior, subjective, exterior, objective. So an iconoclast would be the Sex Pistols, Lou Reed, Beethoven. A formalist would be Frank Zappa, John Cage, Stravinsky, Pink Floyd. This is music. An animist would be Stephen Sondheim, Woody Guthrie, Frank Sinatra, still in music. Classicist, Mozart, Beatles, Gershwin. In film, an iconoclast would be Spike Lee, Mike Leigh. A formalist in film would be Stanley Kubrick. An animist in film would be John Ford, Frank Capra, Woody Allen. Disney, Terrence Malick for a classicist. In art, Frida Kahlo, Georgia O'Keeffe would be an iconoclast. A formalist would be Picasso, Duchamp, Jasper Johns, Mark Rothko. Van Gogh would be an animist. Rembrandt and Ansel Adams would be classicists. Literature, an iconoclast would be Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Bukowski. A formalist in literature would be William Burroughs, George Luis Borges, Thomas Pynchon, Italo Calvino. An animist in literature, Dickens, Hemingway, Stephen King. A classicist in literature, Herman Melville, Jane Austen. And comics, but nobody knows comics, so don't worry about that. And there, Scott McCloud actually does give a presentation on that, a TED Talk, actually. I've never done an audio thing here before. that coming through?
Yeah, not terribly well.
No, we can't hear him.
The sound is very low. No sound.
I think in your share screen button, if you click on that, that'll give you an option to share computer audio.
To share computer audio?
One of the buttons down there, maybe it's under,
Settings? Yeah, no.
as a host, one of them allows you to share computer audio.
Yeah, I've never tried that before.
Pushing the envelope here.
Yeah, okay, because I can share the screen, right?
Yep. Oh, go to mute, go to the mute button all the way to the left. And then if you click on the arrow, it should give you the select a speaker.
I see mute all the way to the F, more, share computer sound. Did that do it?
System.
This particular way of looking at that unseen and unknowable, the vision of that which has already been proven or can be ascertained, and this third kind, a vision of something which can be, which may be, based on knowledge, but is as yet unproven. Now, we've seen a lot of examples of people who are pursuing that sort of vision in science, but I think it's also true in the arts, it's true in politics, it's even true in personal endeavors. What it comes down to really is 4 basic principles. Learn from everyone, follow no one, watch for patterns, and work like hell. I think these are the 4 principles that go into this. And it's that third one especially where visions of the future begin to manifest themselves. What's interesting is that this particular way of looking at the world is, I think, only one of 4 different ways that manifest themselves in different fields of endeavor. In comics, I know that it results in a sort of formalist attitude towards trying to understand how it works. Then there's another more classical attitude which embraces beauty and craft, another one which believes in the pure transparency of content, and then another which emphasizes the authenticity of human experience and honesty and rawness. These are 4 very different ways of looking at the world. I even gave them names: the classicist, the animist, and formalist, and iconoclast. Interestingly, seem to correspond more or less to Jung's 4 subdivisions of human thought. And they reflect a dichotomy of art and life on the left and the right, tradition and revolution on the top and the bottom. And if you go on the diagonal, you get content and form, and then beauty and truth. And it probably applies just as much to music and to movies and to fine art, which has nothing whatsoever to do with vision at all, or for that matter, nothing to do with our conference theme of inspired by nature.
Okay. So thank you for indulging me on that, but I like that categorization, that graph.
So what's the link? There's a link for that one there.
I can give you that TED Talk if you want to see the entirety of it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's okay. quite interesting material.
Yeah, the idea is that every artist is going to have a different motivation, a different goal, depending on what it is they think is important. Either it's about telling the story, just the narrative, or it's about indulging in the craft and the beauty of it, or it's revolutionary thinking, getting something new and different. Yeah, but you can't blame one artist for not accomplishing what they're not trying to do.
It makes me think about that question of quality in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, because I think that points to the fact that, yes, there are all types of qualities, and as there are personalities. And perhaps that's an insight as to, not what is art or what isn't art, but, how does art function? Or, yeah, something like that.
It seems that from what I was able to gather, that science deals with what is believed to be the objective world. In the case of arts, it's dealing with human subjectivity to some degree. So a case where human subjectivity is creating a set of values, for example, whereas science is pursuing what it regards as purely the objective values of nature. So some subjects, you know, it's like economics. Is that a science or an art? You know, there's a tendency to try and call every subject a science these days, whereas in the olden times, you know, they'll be very much distinguish. You know, what was a science and what was an art? You know, is economics a science or an art?
The question is whether you can take subjectivity out of your experience of the world. Can we view the world objectively without any subjective bias or you know, interpretation, even in science?
Yeah, fair enough. But we'd sort of say, let's say we come with different cultures, with different civilizations, that they might develop a similar science, yet their art might differ. For example, you know, various civilizations might come up with a science of astronomy in some way. You know, the ancient Mayans developed an astronomy, the Islamics, Indians developed an astronomy, the Europeans had their astronomy, but all in astronomy. But art might vary between culture. Art is not something that's necessarily so objective.
Well, and I would say that one of its main purposes would be to assist with the integration of subjective experience. I mean, every time you are within any art project, you are delving into the world of the collective unconscious and the personal unconscious. So you have to deal with these materials that you don't know where they're coming from. You can't, there's no microscope to put on it. You just merely have to find a way to give form to it. And once you give it form, then you're left here with trying to understand what it's saying or what its qualities are or what its value is. And I think that's one of the things that for me seems to be a problem when we start applying scientific method to art, is that it starts to lock things into some sort of static state. And we really need, for kids especially, to understand that there's something experiential and that, well, it's along the lines of what Scott was saying, is like, follow no one. You have to actually embrace all the content and materials within, give form to them, and then the work of actually learning to orchestrate their relationships, understand the content, and be the sort of master of your own domain in a sense, right? It's the same thing we kind of do with language, but it's a different kind of language. And yeah, it's fascinating.
Who's trying to apply scientific method to art?
The academy, the university.
It's a bit like
May
the
I
Dead
say-
Poets Society, isn't it? Where, you know, the poetic expression is measured on an XY graph. You know, that's rationalism for you. Rationalism is a doctrine. We have physics, right? We sort of accept, well, you know, physics might explain how a car engine works, and the rationalists want to take this further into the area of the minds. Can the minds be reduced to a type of physics or a type of mathematics? That's the question for the rationalist. Can poetry be put on the XY graph?
May I say something? I think it's kind of foolish of us to bring this duality in everything that we consider, because it's like, okay, science versus art, quality versus ugliness. So there are two stories that I would like to say. I would like to communicate. One is that my child goes to a Waldorf school, and they learn science in a very artistic way. It's about observation and writing your own observation. So it's almost art that's created by your observation. And it could be as simple as, you know, where does fire come from? And a flame in a room is eventually going to turn into a physics teaching moment. However, the description that the children are creating out of that is very artistic. And also the drawings that they create out of that are very, very artistic. So I think we run awry by trying to separate the two. Physics and some quantum mechanics, I would completely classify as art, because it's, you know, in your chart, it follows a lot of those principles. And the other experience of my experience that I wanted to communicate is I went to Sandpoint, Idaho last year, and one of my friends had moved there from Portland to get a, you know, a quiet life, 30 acres, no city explosion and all of that. And I was like, okay, Idaho, do I really want to go to Idaho? But I was so pleasantly surprised. It is a hub for artists. And however, those artists are the ones, it's like a craft that's being passed on to another generation. So the Native Americans find that their children are not interested in the traditional art. So there are tons of other racial artists that are going there and learning this art that has been passed on from generation to generation. And it's exquisitely beautiful. So it's, I mean, would that classify as art because it's being passed down from generation to generation? It's kind of, I mean, you run into music and the oral form, you run into a story that's passed orally from child, you know, from mother to child. So I think art is very, very expansive. It's not narrow as most, I think, Western definitions of it have. Most Western definitions of it, you know, gosh, I can't find a good word, but you know, most Western definitions make it very, very narrow. Okay. Those were my 2 points. That, you know, is a creation.
Yeah, again, I find it very problematic to talk about art because we don't have a good definition of it. And the problem is, with all these conversations, we need to define our terms, and rarely do you ever get a good definition of things like this, things like art, or even any kind of abstract noun like love or justice or freedom or something like that. What are we talking about? We don't know what we're talking about. Part of the problem is, you know, I mean, we consider an idea to be a noun in English, you know, like when I say the word refrigerator, you know what a refrigerator is. When I say the word pen, you know what a pen is. If I say the word tissue, you know what a tissue is. You know what that is. But if I say freedom or justice or love or art, you know, that's up for grabs. But it's in English, it's still considered grammatically the same. I think that's always a problem with any of these kinds of discussions.
Well, when we get into the Christianity and the ancient Greek, of course, we wind up with about how many different varieties for the word love, whereas in English we're just using the one word all the time.
In the New Testament, there's agape and philos, and what's the other one? Eros, right? And they use the same word, love.
So it's that way with any kind of abstraction.
Yeah, my daughter's name is Laksh, and it comes. Oh, oops.
Yeah, I think you see some of the problems of that also, and specifically in the university. What you're talking about, Jyoti, with the Waldorf school is also an interdisciplinary practice in, contemporary art in the university. It's also, you see, art in the academy has been changing drastically over the past few decades, where sculpture is now turned into sort of spatial practice, or the dematerialization of art in general. And you see the lip service of the university saying, well, we want, STEAM, for example, right? We want art, integrated into the process. And I think there's an argument for, well, what is the art of bird watching? Or what is the art of molecular biology? Or what is the art of, astronomy? I think there is a case for that. And that's perhaps a sort of it's a more intimate conversation. But where I see the problem happening is when people in the sciences are claiming science in the name, when what they're really doing is art. And I think specifically I'm thinking about the humanities, and where we're talking about perhaps identity politics, and we're talking about evolutionary biology, and where the feeling that I have is as important as the fact, when it's not. The feeling you have may be an intuition, and it may be a part of your reality, but what you're really doing is more akin to like, well, this is what I perceive, and therefore it's subjective, and therefore this is the domain of art. And this is where for me, and I'm trying to sort this all out also, but I think it's because we have one word. It's like, why don't we have more words for this very complex sort of approach towards knowledge? And everyone wants to use the word art, but at the same time, we really don't know what we're talking about. And so I think that's.
I think the English language is very, very limited.
Yeah.
In terms of, like, I was just gonna say that my daughter's middle name is Laksh, which means to give meaning, and it comes from the goddess Lakshmi, which is a goddess with golden heart. So she connects your heart with your head and your feet. There's like Laksh in itself is to give meaning, and the meaning that you give to a word is, where does that come from? In Hindi, like, does it come from context? Does it come from definition? Does it come from experience? We really have to make it a wide angle instead of such a narrow definition that I think it's kind of like, who's in control of it? Now there's so many more people that can express and create art than 100 years ago. And their creation is just as quote unquote valuable and beautiful as Rembrandt. But in his time, there were only a specific amount of people that had that privilege. So that's been decriminalized.
We all kind of have the privilege of having an art project, right?
Life is my art.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, no, see, now we do, but before art used by different art, which But if you look at it, oh my gosh, it's beautiful, and it speaks and it tells a story. So it it's not like the Western paradigm anymore, or I'm not even going to say Western. I'm like what is traditionally thought of as Western paradigm. And, you know, her first name is June, which in Chinese is a very common name. But we named her June because in Farsi, it means beloved. So we're crossing so many boundaries now that it's beautiful. You know, to me, it seems really, really beautiful that we can access. And I'm myself a writer. I've dabbled in, you know, short stories and poetry, and the access to words, like it's like Kenneth Smith, you know, like webs, where do, you know, you can take that anywhere, and that's what's the power of it. And where does that come from? You know, does that come from perspective? Does that come from culture? Does that come from experience? Does that come from survival? That's it's beautiful to me that there has been such an expansion, and that, you know, so-called quote unquote white Caucasian people are learning Native art, because Native art cannot be passed on to Native children anymore because of lots of political reasons. And they're creating beautiful art, but then you're like, hey, wait a sec, are they just copying? And is that considered art? You know, are songs that are passed over generations, are they considered art? The Western definition, the old Western definition would say no. Those are but every version of the song is very, I'm mumbling now, so stop.
Anybody up for going for a few more of these?
Over these meetings, yeah.
Oh, I didn't mean close it. I just meant a few more aphorisms.
Oh, a few more efforts.
Oh,
How many understood that? I understood it.
I didn't understand it.
To be young is
I understood it. I understood the reference. The reference. The reference is Hebrephrenia.
Hebephrenia. Yeah, hebephrenia. Yeah, I'll look that up.
Schizophrenia of some type. I already looked it up.
Yeah, specifically a condition of adolescence. To be young is to weave a dream of being forever energetic, hopeful, healthy, slim, handsome, confident, fresh, eager to work. It isn't being young that is definitive of being young. Rather, it is being enveloped by illusions, impervious to the thrust of time and sobering insight. Not brevity of years, but naivete defines youth. When I was sending this to a friend of mine, he said this one was his favorite.
Yeah, that one is so outstanding. Yes, it's how I feel now. You know, I've hit 60, and looking back in time.
Right. Who was it that said youth is wasted on the young?
Well, it'd probably be wasted on the old, given my condition.
I think if you want to see what hebephrenia is, just look at any concert footage of a Jonas Brothers concert, or the old when the Beatles played the Ed Sullivan Show. all the girls screaming. That's hebephrenia.
Well, that's the illusion of youth is the confidence of youth, isn't it? And you know, as time goes on, your bubble gets burst.
I think you have confidence.
I think there was one of my favorite writers said that if you know, you're a young writer, you know, your ideas are cheap because you just think they're always going to be inexhaustible. The faucet is never going to shut off. It's always just going to keep flowing. And then you get your 50s, your 60s, your 70s, and you realize, oh, no, it doesn't.
It's true.
But no one talks about that. No one says anything about that. So it's when it happens, it's unexpected.
I would like to think that the faucet gets.
You'll always have more ideas. Why not just sell these for a pittance? You know, I don't know if you follow things like, for example, in comics, you know, the two creators who created Superman, you know, they died in poverty, you know, because they sold Superman to the company, and they got very little, like, you know, $5,000 or something for it. And then that was one of the most popular comics and cartoon characters in history, and they died in poverty. So it's like,
but unless they had sold Superman to the company, maybe the company wouldn't have promoted it as much.
That's true. They had to start somewhere, right?
yeah.
I don't know. I always look to. I look to those that remain prolific throughout their lifetime. To someone like Jung or Picasso, you know, or
Jung's bubble was never burst, was it?
no. And that's what it's like. Why? That's the part that amazes me. And I think it's a willingness to continue. It's almost an infatuation with the unknown. It's like to continue to delve in, and just be enamored with that process of discovery and learning. I think it's like Picasso was constantly learning. You know, his styles constantly changed, and you know, he would throw out everything that he knew. And I feel like Jung does the same thing. He throws out everything and, you know, holds on to maybe what continues to be useful or structural or formational, but it's almost like it's an endless pit of potential, you know. It's that nothingness is filled. No, I like those examples.
Your curiosity is something that never dies or never gets old. So if we can, as an artist, if you can stay in the present moment and be curious, I mean, just curious about what comes to you, that
well, and what have they learned?
Gold.
What have they learned about?
And you can have that at any age.
You know, offsetting Alzheimer's and you know, offsetting.
Use it or lose it.
Yeah, I don't remember the studies specifically, but it was something to the effect of offsetting Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. They found in older people who are constantly activating their mind and constantly learning, like playing games, you know, tending to their garden, all these things. And I think it was a monastery. They were doing research where they couldn't figure out why these older people they weren't getting degenerative brain disorders, you know, and it's because they were constantly learning.
Use it or lose it.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a poem I could read. I'm not sure exactly what it has to do with anything, but it's called
Oh, go
Cinco.
ahead, John.
It's called Syncophrenic Poet by a poet from the 50s, sort of a beat poet named Bob Kaufman. Syncophrenic Poet. A syncophrenic poet called a meeting of all 5 of him, at which 4 of the most powerful of him voted to expel the weakest of him, who didn't dig it, coughing poetry for revenge, beseeching all horizontal reserves to cross, spiral, and whirl.
Was that on paper or was that on your computer screen?
No, it was on my phone. Yeah, I read it off my phone. Yeah.
There's a-
That's beautiful.
Okay.
That's beautiful and so profound. What parts of you can you cut off? Is it the weakest? Is it
Right? Maybe the weak is the one that has something to say from the point of view of art. In the process of
exactly?
you trying to
So
be more saleable, you may be killing the part of you that is inspired.
and obviously Superman was way ahead of his time. And a lot of artists are not recognized at all when they're alive. And I think that's a part of art, that you're way ahead of time, of what is to come. So that's what curiosity, and that's the new idea. And many people, or the new creation formation, and at the time, nobody gets you. And that's why so many artists, you go crazy. So it's not a, saleable quality. It's to me, it always starts with a curiosity about anything. It could be a blade of grass. Just where does that take me?
Also, had a feeling with the superhero theme, with that. You look at the era that the superhero became popular was back in the 1930s, when the Joe Average was feeling crushed by what was going on around them. And then the post-World War II period was generally a strong period of economic growth. And then, the superhero became a bit of a joke. For example, the 60s Batman was pretty sarcastic about the whole concept. And then as things went on and the economics wasn't so positive anymore and people were feeling a bit crushed again, the superheroes began to be taken seriously.
I did read an article once that was talked about, when we were talking about Superman, the creators were named Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, the writer and artist that created Superman. And they created Superman in 1936. Now think about 1936. What was in the news right then? All the news about Nazi Germany and the master race and the Aryans and
Ubermensch, right?
Superman. Okay, and so they create this character named Superman. And did you know that not very long after, I think like within a few months after that, do you know what their second character was titled? The name of their second superhero character that they created after Superman was the Spectre. Now, if you read news headlines at then, the specter of war is about, this was before America entered, the specter of war is looming. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? You know, they were tapping into the zeitgeist of the time, you know?
And on the radio, I think was the Shadow, right?
He wasn't a superhero.
The Shadow wasn't a superhero.
I don't think I'd call
Oh,
him.
he was like a kind of like a police detective, right? Right. But it's still the idea of shadow, dark, lurking.
I wonder if anybody can speak to or has anything to say about like the resurgence of this, the mystical and the superhero. Like fiction is so much now fantasy and fiction. And
What Steven seems to be suggesting is that the more powerless people feel, the more they fantasize of some invincibly powerful champion.
Yeah, that's magical thinking.
Yeah.
The problem with the Marvel movies is they don't mean anything.
Yeah, I'm not talking about quality of the recent superhero films.
No, they don't mean anything. They're surface level. There's no depth to them. You know, the ancient Greek myths had a story, had a purpose, had a moral. There's no meaning to the Marvel movies.
But meanwhile, in the 50s, when you had an era of economic equity and full employment, and people on the assembly line were able to afford to buy houses, that then you have more of these everyman characters who are not superheroes. They're all regular Joes, kind of, who are
Walter Mitty.
Walter Mitty, or even what's his name in North by Northwest. He says, I'm not a red herring. I'm an advertising man. I have a few bartenders and a wife to take care of.
Well, we're going back to Nietzsche here. You know, when Nietzsche felt that, Nietzsche, it was a tragedy that God was taken out of the universe, and so man's left all on his own, and the universe is a big place. So Nietzsche felt, he had to become his own God, the Superman.
Right, which is interesting because Nietzsche wasn't, Dolph Lundgren. He wasn't Arnold Schwarzenegger. He wasn't. That's not what he meant by Ubermensch. He meant the man of the mind who's overcome his primitive physical passions. So the Nazis twisted what he said around into a kind of fighting machine ideal.
Okay. I'm going to do it. Nietzsche.
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 Oh.
Nietzsche. I'm going to say Nietzsche.
Nietzsche. Didn't you ever hear Nietzsche is peachy, but Sauter is smarter? My sister told me that. My sister's a professor of philosophy, so I should know. I should know that.
Nietzsche.
Nietzsche.
Okay.
So did you know that Van Gogh is a good name for a moving company, but his name was Van Gogh, which I'm sure I'm pronouncing wrong, but that's my approximation.
Now, I wonder what you were saying, David, about the current state of the superhero films. Yeah, what scares me is the audience that actually goes along to watch that stuff. There's been very few good ones. I think the best that I saw in recent times was one called Watchmen, which came out about 12 or 15 years ago, and that had a bit of depth to it. But most of them, they're not even good films. They're dull. The personalities in them are dull in general.
But they have a huge audience. That's what
That's the scary bit.
I know. That's what I'm trying to get my head around. Is like, obviously the Superman didn't appeal to anybody at the time, and people were judging it, and yet the Marvel. And not just Marvel, but Game of Thrones, all of that, the Hobbit series, which my son is addicted to.
Well, Game of Thrones, though, the good guys get killed all the time, so that is a little bit different. And I think it was a source of great anger among some fans when their favorite character, who they'd been identifying with for months or years, gets bumped off or turns evil, like one character. And or just is not appearing very much. So I think that's one little difference, that it was based on the books, and in the books he would just try to make it realistic. Good guys die.
Life
Even movies
is
like
cheap.
Star Wars. What?
But isn't that a progression of life? That when you start out, it's all black and white, and then you realize that people aren't all evil and
right.
good. So,
All right, in Game of Thrones, the one character who, or one of the characters who, at least in the beginning, might be considered good is this character Tyrion, who's a dwarf, but he reads books and he thinks, and he has some kind of conscience, and he's the one who murders his father and strangles to death his girlfriend.
We're only left with Sam, aren't we, and his girlfriend. The simple Sam is the only one who was characteristically good throughout the entire series.
That's true. That's a good point.
But I think the meaning of the Game of Thrones is life is cheap.
Right.
maybe you could do that metaphorically, though, you know, killing your father and strangling your girlfriend. That, I mean, I could put a metaphoric tint to it. And also, like,
Oh, sure.
when you consider, like, what's going on in our society with, you know, just the commercialization, the corporatization of jails, you know, like, we don't believe in rehabilitating people anymore. It's more like, okay, just dump them in jail because they're evil forever.
Right. Oh, yeah. The owners of those businesses, the shareholders, they like recidivism. They don't want people to, you know, be rehabilitated.
Exactly. So that's a completely different. So maybe they're addressing some of that. Like, you know, there is lots of gray, and it depends on what kind of support you get, and where does the black come from, and where does the white come from and turn into gray and turn into black. You're not. I mean, it speaks a lot about our culture right now.
Well, I'm afraid that the older idea came from the predominance of something like Christianity, which believed in perfect redemption, whereas our more materialistic society now look at the person who's trouble and say, yeah, throw them in the garbage, they can't be saved. They're more trouble than they're worth. So this is, you know, this is a whole thing with Nietzsche. Even though he became an atheist, he saw the fall of Christianity in Western civilization as a great tragedy. Even though he thought Christianity was idiotic, he saw it had a value against what may follow will have no value. So for Nietzsche, a value is always better than having no value.
Right. Well, you could say good is that which saves you from your evil enemies, right? So you might believe in the goddess Kali because she saves you from, you're maybe a beggar on the street, and she saves you from your evil enemies. And the fact that she has a belt made of heads, well, you know, you'll have a...
No, but the goddess Kali is, you know, a very powerful, dark
Well, I'm saying you could consider her a white character. You could consider her good if she does good for you, if she saves you from people who intend you harm, intend you evil, and they're dark, and she saves you from them, then you could see her as white, or maybe white masquerading as dark, or white using the powers of darkness for whiteness, for goodness. I mean, if you wanted to look at that.
Yep. I just want to point out that color is very, very important in Hindu culture and also mythology. So the darkness, Kali, comes from, you know, if you embody it, it's your feet that are going into the ground and giving you stability. But you can't, they can't see, and you can't see through your souls. You don't know where you're stepping into. But one of the things that Kali very powerfully represents is that you are born with all the characteristics that, or you're born with all that you need to have a meaningful life. which is very opposite of Christianity, where you're born in sin. Here, I mean, I don't know Christian philosophy enough to. All I know is, very little. So I please take that in context. But they, and like Saraswati, who is all about the head and knowledge, is always white.
Who is that?
Saraswati.
I've never heard of her.
She's the goddess of knowledge, and she's always dressed in white, and she is, the personification of what goes on in your head. So the three goddesses are connecting your body, and Lakshmi is always golden because she resides in your heart, and she is where meaning and feeling come from. So in a way, what the mythology is metaphorizing is that feeling comes from a mixture of body and movement, because your legs are giving you movement, and what you have learned factually. So each one you can
Saraswati.
Saraswati. It's Saraswati.
I found that on Wikipedia. Saraswati.
Yeah. So all the whiteness comes from her. I mean, color plays a huge role in, even to this day. It's like you're considered ugly if you're dark. Just having, nothing to do with goodness or evil.
They correspond with Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Saraswati, Lakshmi, and Parvati, they correspond with Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva.
Yeah, I think they're god and goddesses together.
I mean, one corresponds with one. So like Saraswati corresponds with Brahma.
With Brahma, and Krishna corresponds with whatchamacallit, Lakshmi. But it's so it's not static at all. There's so many myths that and they're all metaphorical. They're not it depends on perspective, and the perspective that a lot of fundamentalist Hindus have taken it.
I think it's kind of oddly quintessential that in Christianity you have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, and in Hindu mythology or belief you have Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. I mean, that's a kind of a trinity, right?
Oh yeah, it's a trinity. So you have the creator, the destroyer, and the.
And doesn't it even correspond with past, present, and future? Like Brahma would be past, and the future always destroys the past and the present, and then Vishnu is the present moment, or whatever. Present.
Yeah. So yeah, Vishnu is the preserver. That's the one I was forgetting. But then the goddesses combine the body, and the gods are, you're very right, John, are time. So those are.
So the goddesses are physical, and the gods are temporal.
Temporal. Yeah. But then the temporal always mixes with the somatic. So
Mother Earth and Father Time.
And Brother Wind.
Brother Wind.
Yep. That's very Waldorfian. Learned that when my who's now 18 started nursery. So Waldorf school is all based on stories and myth. They don't start history until 6th grade. Before that, it's all myth. it's all interpretation and imagination. So
Actually, everything is a story, kind of. The story of algebra, the story of chemistry.
Yeah, so that's what they're emphasizing. That's what I was trying to get to, that art and science, we don't live in a dual world. So.
Well, that would be a visionary statement, right? That the only world there is or can ever be is the interface between the past and present, which is the past and future. Interface with the past and the future, which is the present, and so it's evanescent. As soon as you say it, it's gone. It will become the past.
So it's the in-between that is
reality.
I was going to say real, but then I'm like, oh, okay, I don't know if that'll lead us into a whole discussion on what's real. But it is the in-between, it's relationship.
It's more specifically maybe the spirit that animates the in-between. If the tensions are points in space and it's what's moving between, then the question is, well, how do you maintain that? Or how do you characterize it, personify it, or better understand it?
Yes, Rama wants to know, how can we carve this in stone so that people will look to it?
Oh no, but Darren, you said something that was very profound. I think you found the definition of art. Yeah. Amazing.
No, I mean, to me, art is a verb. And it really bothers me when people point to something and say, that's art. I'm like, well, what are you pointing at? You're pointing at an object or a picture. You're not pointing at art. The realization for me was that art is a behavior, and
it's the relationship between the creator and the audience, and that relation, the in between, can manifest in any shape, which is what you said, and that in between is what art is. Because many people, can look at Monet. I'm sure my aunt, who lives in, very, very rural, poor India, would look at Monet and go, what?
Well, and you're still only articulating one half of the artistic observation of art, let's say, from a viewer standpoint, from a spectator standpoint. It's still just a spectacle. Right? But what is that? What does it mean to actually embody art? What does it mean to give form to art, through painting, sculpture, dance, music? It's perhaps we're still dealing with a kind of tension that maybe Jung would say it's between the conscious and the unconscious, and it's it's the movement between them. And that constant sort of process of going into the unknown, pulling out whatever's there, and then, I mean, you can do whatever you want with it at that point, but it's that eternal return. Who said the eternal return? I mean, there's a pattern there, I'd like a better framework to talk about these things, because I think
I have a question. I have a question with a type of eternal return question, that the genie demon comes to visit Adolf Hitler, and Adolf Hitler's the starving sidewalk artist, and the demon says, well, you have two fates. You can die in the gutter, or you can become, the wicked, evil genius of the Third Reich. But, your name will be in history forever. Which do you choose? And Hitler says, will to power, I'll go for the big Hitler.
Did he? I mean, did he?
I'm just making up, the moral argument. Hitler is always, he's always taken as a divine ruler of evil. If we take him as a measure of what an evil man is, which I don't think actually. He's the complete evils. But if you were in his situation and you were the starving artist on the sidewalk, resentful against the world, and you knew your fate was to die in the gutter. And then the evil genie pops before you and says, you can rise to almost to masterhood of the world. You can have this life instead of this ruinous one here. What would you pick?
Well, then you should just spend the rest of your life painting that genie until you figure it out.
What if there's an alternative universe?
You're going to go for dying in the gutter.
Well,
that's your two options.
Because at that point you've already determined that the great father is a tyrant. All of culture is a tyrant. There is no access to him, and he's only going to destroy you, right? So you're already defeated by one god, right? So what are you left with? You're left with your other god that perhaps rules your internal world and rules your imagination. I'd choose that one, you know? I would choose, and maybe that one was where.
So you'd be happy to die in the gutter.
But I think you're talking about the future. Sorry, there's a train going through that's super, super loud. I hope you guys can hear me.
Yeah.
But the question that you're posing is about the future, and you're giving only two options. However, in the creation of that future, he could come up with lots of variations. You know, just because someone says that this is what someone, as in the genie, says that this is what your fortune or your fate is.
You're kind of rigging the question, yeah.
Am I?
My position was the moral choice. Hitler could make, Hitler becomes the great evil. And all,
you're kind of loading the dice. The way you're framing the question is kind of loading the dice. You could even be
well, didn't Nietzsche do that in a sense as well? You know,
but
that's your moral choice. You can either die in the gutter or you can become Hitler as we knew him. So if you die in the gutter, by contemporary standards, you've done the moral thing. You've contained the beast. You've been a nobody. The world has crapped on you, has squashed you into the ground. Or you could become the grand demon that squashes the rest of the humanity. Which one do you pick?
Well, that's kind of, did you ever see the movie or read the book, The Last Temptation of Christ? That's the same choice he's given. That he can either die on the cross and save humanity from some horrible future that's never gone into in detail, or he can be transported back to his home and marry Mary Magdalene and have children, have a normal life, normal happy life, but the human race is doomed. And so he chooses to die on the cross.
Yeah, one's the grandiosity of the ego, though, I suppose, with Hitler as in a sense, Jesus as well, by dying on the cross, achieves his grandiosity.
Well, this is just a story. What's the Constanticus? That's the.
Yeah, I actually read the book.
Oh, you did?
I remember the film. I remember the protests around the film.
Huge protests. People went crazy.
And I've been an idiot and very cheeky, would go up to the protesters and say, nail them up. Nail some sense into them, and they didn't understand what I was saying at first. Finally understood, from Monty Python.
Oh, for Life of Brian.
Yeah.
But I wonder what the in between for Jesus and the Jews was. Was it the personification of Jesus on the cross, which is used so much as sculpture now?
Well, the Jesus was meant to be the Jewish Messiah. That's what the Jews were looking for. The Jews were looking for a Messiah to come along, which would become a king, virtually their king, and defeat the Romans, and reestablish the kingdom of Zion.
And so when Jesus came along and said, God isn't just, or my Father isn't just the King of the Jews, he's the creator of the universe. And those who do his will are his people. No one can own God. They were furious, he's stealing our God.
So it's Christianity.
I think if you read Mark, the Gospel of Mark, getting some feedback, where throughout Mark, he makes no claim to be the Messiah and explicitly forbids the apostles and his followers to call him the Messiah.
Right. Someone says calls him good teacher. And he says, why do you call me good? No one is good.
Yeah.
And there was something else.
He said nobody was good except for God.
Oh. Sorry.
Yoti, come to our Thursday night meeting. We're going to dive deep into Christianity Thursday night. Not
Thursday
this
night?
Thursday, but on the 27th.
On the
What's it called?
27th.
Yeah.
What's it called? It's the same thing, web aphorisms?
Millennium Microcosm. We're going
Millennium
to...
Microcosm. We'll have to look for that.
It's on the calendar.
But you'll
Thursday
send us
night.
a reminder or something?
It's on the calendar. Thursday night.
Okay. Thursday night. Let me write it. Thursday the 27th,
What
right?
time?
Oh, yeah, what time?
7 p.m. Pacific, which is 10 p.m. Eastern.
It is 8 p.m. Central. Yeah, the evening ones are kind of hard for me to attend because
What was it called again?
It's on the calendar. If you look on...
I wouldn't want to write it in my little book here.
Millennia and Microcosm.
Millennia and Microcosm.
so that one is mostly about Christianity.
We're just about to start. Wait, so we're doing the full book, but we are about to start the chapters on medieval civilization.
Oh, that would be very interesting because I read a lot about medieval civilization this year because that's what my daughter was studying. So I hope I can attend.
And if you can't, you can do the reading anyway on your own.
I just finished reading The Return of Martin Guerre a little while ago.
This is a study of Kenneth Smith.
It's no fun reading by yourself and not having people to discuss it with.
Then stop by. You can talk.
I shall try my best. Okay, thank you, David, so much.
Thank you, David.
Thanks,
Okay.
David.